Welcome to this QSI First Thursday CPD. This morning we have Keith Blizzard back with us again to talk about procurement matters. Keith works for Harrison Clark Rickaby, the solicitors, although Keith isn't a solicitor. I'm sure he'll explain that in a moment. He's also the current chair of the QSI UK and Ireland branch. So Keith, I shall hand over to you, leave you to get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Now, I've got to see if I can change the slides because the little cursor's not coming up.
Use your arrows on your keyboard.
Use the arrows on the keyboard. Okay, right. No, that's not working.
That worked before, didn't it?
No, I had little pictures down here.
Right. Now I've got control because I'm changing it now, but you had control before when we tested it.
Right, if I stop control, and now I'll go take control again.
Give control, Keith Blizzard. It came back to me. There you go. Sorry about that, folks.
No, I can't change the slides. Won't let me change. I don't know why. Have you just changed it?
Yeah, still letting me do it for some reason. Okay, let's
All right,
run with that.
Go with that then. Right, good morning, everybody. As Suzanne has said, that my name is Keith Blizzard. I'm a partner and a non-solicitor at the and I'm head of the construction consultancy and dispute determination. I'm part of the construction engineering team at Harrison Clark Rickaby's. My primary profession is I'm a chartered quantity surveyor. I'm also a chartered construction manager, and I'm a chartered arbitrator. I'm a panel adjudicator, and I'm a commercial mediator, dispute board member and forensic surveyor, and I'm also a visiting lecturer at a number of universities. So I have a very low boredom threshold, so I like to do lots of different things. I spend the majority of my time nowadays sitting as arbitrator and mostly, I suppose, as adjudicator. I also do some mediations and some client advice. Before I did all this, I actually had a proper job and had my own construction, quantity surveying firm and project management company, which is why I feel able to talk to you today about construction procurement. Thanks. Right, so what is construction procurement? What am I going to be talking about? Well, procurement, it refers to the process of obtaining a product or service from conception to completion. So in terms of construction project, it's how the participants choose to structure the contractual and practical arrangements for the project and therefore allocate responsibility for the design and the construction. But it's from conception to completion. So it's right from the very beginning, the early idea. We want to have a building put up for whatever reason. You could be a commercial company, you need additional manufacturing space, so you need a bigger building. If you need a bigger building, you might have an additional space. You might need further offices, more office space. It could be you're a house builder and you want to build lots of houses because that's what you do. It could be all sorts of reasons why, what the conception is and for why you actually want to have a building put up. Narrowing it down into construction, the two things that are important are the design and the construction. So the main types of construction procurement are traditional. I'll go through each of these in turn. Traditional, design and build, or turnkey or two-stage procurement, management contracting, construction management, and cost-plus contracts. Thanks, Suzanne. There are a number of, looking at traditional, there are a number of different factors will be taken into account when considering the type of procurement route that's appropriate to a particular project. The three key considerations are time, cost, and quality, the eternal triangle when it comes to construction projects. Those are the three considerations, and they all affect one another. If time is the most important thing, then you're going to have higher costs to get it built quickly. And are you worried about quality? Everyone's concerned about quality, but it differs. For example, if you're the Medical Research Council, your #1 priority will be quality. Because if you're doing medical research facilities, the quality of the build, the laboratories you're building has got to be absolutely perfect. Similarly, in terms of food production and food processing, in those areas, then again, it will be quality. But also, if you're a retailer, there'll be time, and cost is always one of the factors to a greater or lesser degree. If while I'm talking, people want to add in and make any comments, then or ask questions, please do just unmute yourself and ask the question, because I've heard this talk before. Anyway, it's important to seek the balance between these from the client's perspective. As I say, if you're Medical Research Council, quality is number one. If you're a retailer, then time is often the predominant one with quality, but also they'll have a budget and they'll be concerned about cost. It's very rare that cost is not an important factor, but those three do pull against one another. So what are other factors are to be taken into account? Well, the nature of the project. What are you actually building? Are you building something like the Gherkin, which is, you know, a fairly shaped building in the centre of London because it's a prestigious project that you want to be famous for, if you like. It's a prestige project. Or is it simply you want a bigger shed in which to do your manufacturing or storage? What's the value of the project? Is it a case that this is being lots of millions of pounds worth, or is it quite modest? If you've got a modest project in terms of value, I'm looking at the moment, I'm advising a client in connection with, would you believe, some new public lavatories, a block of public lavatories in a town, which there are certainly some lessons to be learned about the way it was run. But in fact, I haven't been there yet. I haven't visited the site, but I'm told that they're very posh public toilets. But anyway, so the value of the project could be multi-millions down to a few £1,000s. What about the expertise and experience of the project team? Well, who are you going to have as part of the project team? We'll look at this in a bit more detail later, but are you going to have a full team? You just got an architect. If you're doing a house extension, the chances are you, and I've known it lots of times, people have used an architecture or even a quantity surveying student or a building surveying student to do the drawings to get planning approval and then go out and get a contractor. But you can run up to, if you're doing a big housing development, you might want lots of different consultants involved. And what are the known risks should be associated with the project? What are those known risks? The ground conditions is obviously one, depending on where it is. It may be the confinement of the site. If you're doing building the Gherkin in London, if you're building in London anyway, you're going to be building a building which the perimeter of which is the site's boundary. So how are you actually going to build it? Because you've got to carry on building from inside out. How are you going to do that? How are you going to get deliveries? Again, it's a if any of you worked in London, you know it is a major problem. Thanks. Right, in traditional procurement, let's take a medium-sized project. You'll have a developer or an employer at the centre. Now then, they may need to have bank or a finance agreement in some way with somebody to provide some or all of the finance. Well, who are they going to appoint as their consultants? Obviously, you're going to need an architect, so to do the design, but what about an engineer? Well, the engineers could be a civil engineer. If you've got a large housing project and there's roads and drains, you're going to probably want a civil engineer to design that. You might want a structural engineer, the foundations. If you're building in the middle of London, how are you going to support the building? Power foundations, you're going to need a structural engineer. What about inside the building, the environment? If you're building something like a cold store, for example, for storage of food, or a meat processing plant, or other plants, laboratories, you're probably going to want a fairly well-controlled environment, in which case you're going to need mechanical electrical services engineers. Think of an airport as well. There's an awful lot of electrics going into an airport, so you need services to keep it warm. cool in summer, warm in winter, but also there's going to be a lot of electrics because there's so many different systems. You're going to need a project manager. Now, is this a contract administrator or a project manager on behalf of the developer? You can have both. We did when we had a QS practice, we did a project for a client building some offices, and they had a project manager, their own project manager, because the managing director and the board couldn't look after everything that was going on with these new offices. So we had to deal with the project manager. And at the pre-commencement meeting, the architect designed it, we went out to tender, selected a contractor. And at the first meeting, the pre-commencement meeting, I said to the contractor that I was going to be the contract administrator and that he could only accept instructions given by me. And I also told the client's project manager that if he wanted any changes or wanted anything, because he was basically going to live on the site, that if he wanted any changes to be made or had any concerns, he was to come to me. He was not to talk to the contractor direct. At the end of the project, he had given several instructions to the contractor, which the contractor had carried out. I was responsible as the project manager, but we were also the quantity surveyors for the budget. So at the end of the day, I had to go back to the managing director and said, right, well, we've agreed with the contractor what the final account should be. However, there are £28,000 worth of other items which I did not direct and instruct. The contractor has carried them out at the request of your own project manager. So the contractor is due to be paid for those because there is an agreement between your project manager and therefore on behalf of the company and the contractor. So they do have to be paid for, but they're not within the budget that we'd agreed. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I later found out the managing director got their own project manager in and said to him, you have created a difficulty for me because you instructed the contractor, contrary to what the project manager told you. Instead of going to him, you've actually told the builder to do £28,000 worth of work, which he's done. We've got the benefit of it. We're going to have to pay the contractor. As far as I can see, there are two ways of paying the contractor. Either you personally write a cheque for £28,000 and pay the contractor direct, or I've got to get that money from another budget, in which case your resignation's accepted and I'll have to get started on finding the money from elsewhere. Apparently, he accepted his P45 and left. I had no idea that's going to be the outcome of my meeting with the managing director, but that's what actually happened. Obviously, you need a quantity surveyor, the clients, the developers or the employer's quantity surveyor, to look after the budget from their point of view. There may be other consultants as well. You might have landscaping. We did one where we had an artist as a consultant because they wanted a nice fountain in the car park, in the driveway really. And they had we put in a provisional sum of £12,500 for some artistic feature. It was a long time ago, I hasten to add. When they finally decided what they were going to have, the chairman of the company, his wife, decided that this is the one that she wanted. It would look nice in front of the offices, in the middle of the fountain, a nice artistic sculpture, and there would be a fountain with water around. And it cost £250,000, which rather blew the budget of £12,500. So you can have other consultants as well. Those all have to have appointments. How are you appointing the architect, the engineer, the various engineers, those people? Well, you need to have some sort of agreement with them, and you need to have a schedule of the services they're providing for two reasons. A, it's a contract with each of them to carry out and provide the services that you require them to, and they want to know what they're supposed to be doing. But also you want to know what each of them's doing because you want to allocate the responsibilities so that there are no responsibilities that are left in between the architect and the engineer. In other words, you have to have all the schedules of services and you have to make sure they all match up so everything is covered, the full design. Going the other way, then you've got the developer, the employer, you go out to tender and you have a building contract with the contractor. And obviously the way the industry works in this country and overseas is you'll then have specialist subcontractors to come in and actually do the works. Thanks. Suzanne? Next slide, please. Are you stuck with it as well?
Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute, but yeah, I'm back now. Yeah, it's not moving.
No, I can't move them. Ah, little things come up.
There we go. Oh, one of us is doing it. Is that you? Ah, go on. You do it then if you can, Keith.
I can. The little
yeah.
The little array of buttons has turned up. Right. In traditional procurement, the defining feature is that the design and construction are separated. The employer gives the design to the contractor undertakes to build in accordance with the design. The team of consultants come up with the design, and it means then that the employer has a great input into the design that his team are actually preparing, because they're talking back to him all the time at what do you want here, what do you want there, they're advising him, and then you end up with a complete design. That then is used to go out to tender, where you're often used to with a bill of quantities. I mean, some people still use bill of quantities, but it might be sort of a specification drawings, but you want a fixed price for carrying out for the contractor to carry out and build what has been designed. So the client appoints a building contractor. Actually, it's the other way around. He appoints a team of consultants and then separately a building contractor. The consultants design the project and then the building contractor builds it. A contract administrator or architect will administer the building contract on behalf of the client. Now, it depends on which of the standard forms you're using. If you're using the JCT, it will be a contract architect, a contract administrator. If you're using the NEC contract, then it's called a project manager, the person in charge who actually administers the contract. Obviously, as I've described, the contracts will normally be appointed following a tender process or some negotiations. There are a number of standard forms of building contract available for procurement, the JCT, and then there's the NEC as well. I'll use the JCT because they're the most commonly used in building, really. Civil engineering, you tend to use the NEC, although the NEC, it's now the NEC4, have become more popular over the years. I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to comment. Do you mainly use JCT or NEC forms of contract? Does anyone want to unmute yourself, please? And then
JCT
just say
nearly all the time.
JCT, yeah, I thought that's the case. They're the much more commonly used.
JCT.
Yeah, because JCT published about 106 or 108 documents now. The different contracts, subcontracts, and adjudicators, contracts, and all sorts of things. Right. The contractor may be asked to design a discrete element, even though it's done traditionally. Procurement is traditional. Certain elements of the design may be handed over to the contractor. For example, let's take my lavatory block. The architect is not going to design all of the pipe work, all the pipe joints, and where the pipe work runs. So the plumbing, on a simple job like that, the plumbing will be designed by the plumber. So that element of design will be handed over. Similarly, the architect is not going to specify the exact cable used for every light switch and for every cable that's used in the whole building. That will be left to the electricians. So they will have responsibility for that element of design. Where you've got something like, I've done a lot of adjudications over cladding. So where you've got an external specialist element to the building, like external cladding, then you'll get the cladding contractors, subcontractors, to do the design, which means you'll need a warranty back because they're taking responsibility for that design. You'll want warranty back to the employer and probably to the funder as well. But I'm not running through all the contract documentation today. Yeah, traditional procurement. So what are the advantages of traditional procurement? Well, time. Once the design is completed, there's more certainty in the construction time. However, in my experience as a QS, a PQS, people tend to take a couple of years to make the decision that they actually want a building. But if they've already taken 2 years to make the decision they want a building, they now want the building now. And that's one of the big problems. But once the design is completed or almost completed, you're not down to the last detail, but there's enough to go out to tender on, then you can then proceed because the client knows what he's going to get. It's then just down to the construction time. What are the different disadvantages? Well, the overall project period is often longer because the design needs to be completed before construction. There's little overlap. The design has to be completed, nearly complete, not down to the last detail. You can decide what colours you want the walls painted. You can decide what wallpaper, what carpets, things like that. But major elements, all the major elements, so the contractor knows what he's going to build, have to have been decided. And the project can be delayed by the client changes made during the construction period. So if that's down to really the construction professionals, particularly the architect. The hardest part of an architect's job, I understand from talking to architects, is getting the answers from the client as to what exactly it is that they want. Because people often think they know what they want. Then when they see it being built, they then definitely know it's not what they want. They want something different because then they got something to work to. It's the old blank sheet of paper. Design a house from a blank sheet of paper. Well, I couldn't do it. Most people couldn't. They have some idea, but then if an architect comes up with a design, you know that yes, it works for you or no, it doesn't. So what are the advantages on cost? You get a fixed lump sum contract price, which is with more certainty. You'll have a contingency allowance, but you've got a pretty good idea because the contract you enter into, you've handed over the design to the tendering contractors and said, right, how much to build that? The other thing is time, actually, because when I was PQS, what I used to do is clients often knew how long well, we'd sit down with the architect and work out how long it was going to take to build it. And we'd say, okay, tender over a 56-week program. And I always got the client wherever, well, I always tried, nearly always successfully, to get the client to allow us to let the tendering contractors put an alternative program and an alternative pricing. Because would you believe sometimes they would take longer and cost less, and sometimes they take less time and cost less. Because whereas the QS and the architect could sit down and work out how long we thought it was going to take to build, the experts are the building contractors, they're the tendering contractors, so why not let them give a time? And it affects the cost as well. The disadvantage is, well, the cost of the project could be increased by a client changes being made during the construction period. Well, that's always going to be the case. If the client starts changing their mind on traditional procurement, they see something going up, they've changed their mind, or they don't like what they see, they want something changed. And therefore you go back to the contractor and issue a variation. And in fact, talking to people from other industries, particularly the motor industry, the only industry I know, I've been able to find out, even with IT to an extent as well, actually, where the contractor contracts to build something and can honestly say at day one, he doesn't know what he's going to build. Because all the contracts include for accepting changes. No alteration to this contract, no instruction will vitiate the contract. In other words, doesn't bring it to an end. So, so on day one, the contractor can honestly say he doesn't know exactly what it is he's going to build. He knows what he's going to start building, but because he's agreed to these to accept variations under certain circumstances, obviously the variations can't be too extensive, then that's what he's got to build. So day one, if you look at what he was started to build on day one and what he's finally built, there will be differences. Further fees are paid to the consultants providing the design services. If the employer changes their mind, then the consultants have to be paid for changing their design. And some of the traditional contracts, like measurement contracts, don't include a fixed lump sum price. What about quality? So an architect may supervise. Do you know why the JCTs all put architect contract administrator? Just as a matter of interest, does anybody know why? The JCT contracts have all evolved from the original contract, which was the architect's contract, the RIBA contract in 1960 something, 63. Anyway, and basically it was the architect, and the architect was the contract administrator. Now, of all the professions, anyone can call themselves a quantity surveyor, but you can only call yourself an architect if you're on the ARB register. It's a protected title, it's a protected name. So, as the RIBA contributed to the JCT, they didn't want to become contract administrators. What they said was, no, the architect controls the contract. So you can have an architect, but if you want somebody else, they can't call themselves architect, so they'd have to call themselves something else, i.e. a contract administrator. So when I was the contract administrator, I couldn't call myself the architect, I was a contract administrator. And the JCT say that was at the beginning, when you delete architect to be contract administrator, you don't have to go through, although I have seen it, where every time it refers to the architect to be contract administrator, in all the provisions of the whole contract, somebody went through, in an architect's firm went through and deleted contract administrator because they were a qualified architect. So anyway, point of interest, I hope. So the architect may supervise the project and will therefore have a duty to administer the building contract properly. Sorry, no, it should be properly. Sorry. How many times you read these things over, there's still typos. And thus has more control over the quality. The architect is there. If the architect doesn't see something, they don't take responsibility for it. It is still the contractor who is responsible for the work they carry out, because the architect doesn't live on site, he's not there all the time. But the architect is, it may be that I've known it done where there's sample panels of perhaps a unit that's going to be built, or a wall, some brickwork in a wall actually, some fancy brickwork. So they did a sample panel, and the architect says, yes, that's the standard I want, follow that. So what are the disadvantages? Some of the standard forms of traditional contracts are suggested to be more confrontational in nature, which increases the risk of disputes and on quality of work and services. You have to be clear what you are saying about the quality. But it can be a matter of dispute. But if the architect, it always comes down to the personality of the architect and the site agent, really, and the people you're working for. I mean, there are I've seen plenty of examples of really good brickwork, and I've also seen some pretty appalling examples of brickwork where you wouldn't call them bricklayers, they were just brick stackers. They just chuck mortar on, and that's no good. If the architect sees it, he can condemn it. He has power under the JCT contracts to condemn the work and say no. I've even known contractors take on subcontract bricklayers who really didn't know what they were doing, and they've sacked them of their own volition because they knew the architect wouldn't accept the work. The client's precise requirements need to be set out in full detail in the technical documents which form part of the building contract. Now we'll look at design and build. Again, you've got the developer in the middle, you've got a bank funder, so there's a finance agreement. Now on the other side here, you're going to have the principal designer, a quantity surveyor, and the employer's agent. And here you're going to ask the contractor to complete the design. You're going to give him some part of the design, carry on and complete the design, and take responsibility for it. Responsibility for that design. And in fact, quite often architects solicitors, my firm included, in the construction team, when they're drafting these contracts, actually they do amend the contract so that the contractor takes responsibility for the design done by the principal designer, which seems a bit unfair to me, but anyway, people accept it, so I don't know why, but they do. And then on the other side, you've then got the building contract with the contractor, but the contractor here has to appoint its own architect, engineer, and other consultants, and as well as doing the building works. So it's a completely different sort of contracting arrangement. And it's up to the employer just how much information he gives. There are the employer's requirements and the contractor's proposals. And the employer's requirements are what we want you to carry out and complete the design of. And that can vary from almost a complete design to very little information. All we want is a 25,000 or 200,000 square foot industrial unit. It's got to have a clear floor to ceiling height inside for our racking of this height. It can be no wider than this, or it's got to be and no longer than that, because that's the site area that you've got, or that's the building for the racking system you use. I'm thinking of something like Amazon. You don't really want to care what it looks like particularly, unless you've got corporate colours, in which case you want those. But the external envelope will be sorted out by the planners. Really, what they'll allow. So, what are the key features? The contractor is responsible for both the design and the construction. The contractor may only appoint specialist designers or subcontractors to carry out design, but the contractor remains liable. So in other words, you still go after the contractor, even if there's a design fault. They carry the responsibility for the design, but obviously they can bring in other people, the people who've actually done the design. In court cases, they're just known as Part 20 defendants. And I'll give you an example. A design and build contract included a car park. There were some problems with the multi-storey car park, with water getting in, ingress of water. So the employer went after the commenced proceedings against the design and build contractor. The design and build contractor then brought our client, who applied the waterproofing materials, brought our client into the proceedings, so it's really their problem. And then when we got involved, then we also brought in the material supplier who suggested which materials we used. So it went down the food chain. But if we all disappeared in terms of our supplier and our client went bust, the design and build contractor still carried the can. The maximum risk is transferred for the employer under this method because you're no longer worried about, you're not presenting the contractor with the design, you're setting out design criteria. So in offices, it must be, you might want to say, right, for example, the temperature control. Whatever the external temperature, the temperature in the building must be within 19 to 23 degrees or whatever. And that way, it is up to the design and build contractor to employ M&E consultants and design and build the project so that the offices remain between 19 and 24 degrees, whatever the weather. If not, then all that employer does is he just goes back to the contractor and says, there's a problem. If it was traditional, you'd have to go after the M&E consultant and the builder to see whether it's, because the M&E consultant will say it's the builder's fault and the builder will say the design was wrong. So the employer engages the contractor to provide a completed building to an agreed cost and programme. The employer appoints a consultant, the employer's agent, to oversee the works and administer the contract. There's less administration in terms of a D&B, but they do things on behalf of the employer. That's why they're called the employer's agent. The contract can be chosen through a tender process or through negotiation. It's common for the employer to appoint a team of professional consultants to develop the initial design of the project, and for these appointments then to be novated from the employer to the contractor to allow the contractor to complete the detailed design under the building contract. In other words, basically what happens is, novated is just a legal term really, they become the employer, they become the contractor's consultant, but because they're novated, they become the contractor's consultant responsible for the design since the very beginning. That's how it gets transferred across. So the employer sits down, employs a team to do the design, gets the design done, hands over to the contractor, but when they enter into a contract, they also transfer their own design team. And I've lost all my little logos again. Can you change, Suzanne? Yep, great, thank you. What's the advantages of design and build? The construction period is relatively, what the advantage in terms of time? The construction period is relatively certain. The client will only need to develop the outline design. It can therefore be quicker than traditional procurement. In other words, the time period between concept, we need a building, and actually starting on site and therefore completion can be shortened, because the design and build contractor excuse me, can overlap. Instead of having the design completed by the employer's team, then tendered and then handed over to the contractor, what can happen is the design and build contractor gets the design as far as it is, tenders, and then can complete the design while he's actually doing the building works. Disadvantages: the overall projected period can be similar to additional procurement, where the client also appoints the professional team and then novates these to the contractor, because it depends on how long they take to do the design. Project can be delayed by client changes made during the construction period. Now, obviously, with traditional, the employer can go back to the designers and say, I'm thinking, I want this changed, I want that changed. They can advise him without actually interfering with the contractor. And only once a decision is made, they then go to the contractor and say, right, we've now decided we don't want that, we want this. And there'll be an instruction issue which the contractor has to follow. With design and build, the employer wants a change, he has to go to the design and build contractor, who then has to consult his own people. But you have to pay for that information as well. So variations can be quite costly, but also it can delay the project. In terms of cost, the fixed lump sum contract price is relatively certain, because once you've said that's what you want, you've handed over your design as far as it's gone, and tell the contractor to complete the design and build the project. Basically, you're going to end up getting the keys at the end. Whatever the problems the contractor has, they're his, and the price doesn't change. The final price paid can be significantly affected by client changes made during the progress of the project, which I've just described. What about quality? The contract's performance can be monitored for the client during the progress of the contract by the employer's agent. And the client's requirements can be managed by virtue of there being a single point of responsibility. If you're not happy with something in terms of the quality, you just go to the contractor. Now then, obviously, if you're competing in design and build, then you're going to go for, contractors will likely to go for the cheapest option. But having said that, there have been design and build projects which have won architectural awards. It's not, it depends on how you choose the design and build contractor and whether you just go for the lowest price or not. But anyway, what are the disadvantages in terms of quality? In light of the fact that the contractor's profit will depend on the contractor fulfilling the contract requirements, at the lowest possible price, the client may have concerns over being able to control quality of the contractor's works. No, still can't change. Can you change it, Suzanne? Thank you. Thought about two-stage procurement, but the first stage is, during stage one, the project will be tendered by the employer on the basis of an incomplete design, price and programme, as prepared by the professional team engaged by the employer. Potential contractors will put forward proposals and the employer will choose a contractor to work on the pre-construction section, second stage of the tender. So in other words, two-stage, first stage is you get a price in, you develop a design and go out to a number of contractors. The second stage is, during stage two, the employer and the contractor will enter into a pre-construction services agreement, whereby you're now getting a contractor to carry out services, which you should pay for. But they're helping to develop the design, particularly when you've got something which is quite complex. That can be very helpful, actually, to do it this way. Yeah, I've known several projects that have gone that way, whereby you need to have input from the contractor because he's got the problem of dealing with what's on the site. The one project I'm thinking about, which I can't tell you about, but I'm thinking about is where there were lots of electrical services, and it was where they needed a new substation, where the substation was going to go, and they wanted the contractor to deal with it. So the contractor was involved in the second stage. We went for his two-stage tender, and two-stage procurement rather, and the contractor got heavily involved for some months in helping sort out with the local electricity board, the power supplier, then whether they needed another substation, how it affected their systems, how it could be done, where it could be built, and how it could be built. The contractor then advised the employer on the final cost estimate, the buildability of the design, and other pre-construction services before then being engaged under a construction contract. In other words, you still get a main building contract, but what you're doing is you're entering into a contract with a contractor to help work with you and help develop the design. You can then actually, once you've got that sorted out, because you've paid for that work, you can then go out to not only that contractor, although they'll have an advantage because they have more detailed knowledge, which I suppose when it comes to pricing may be a disadvantage because they know what the problems are likely to be, which other contractors might not. But anyway, other tenderers might not, and therefore not pricable. But then you can go out to more than just that one contractor that's developed the design so far. You've paid him for that work, and then you go out to other contractors as well, and to get the right price. Next slide, please, Suzanne. Yeah, thank you. Right, in theory, the employer could work with a contractor up to the end of the second stage and then appoint a separate contractor to carry out the construction works. But in practice, the parties are generally able to agree terms of the formal building contract as they work so closely in the first stages, and that's usually what happens. What some contractors will do, and some employers will do, particularly where public money is being spent, then they'll get a second price or a third price, go out to some sort of tender to get some idea that the price, so they can prove that the price that they're actually paying to the original contractor is reasonable. The employer and contractor will usually enter into a design and build form of contract because of the contractor's design involvement in the earlier stages. Two-stage procurement is generally used on large or complex projects, as I've described, not on, you won't do it on simple ones, really. Okay, Suzanne, thank you. Right, management contracting. There seems to be some confusion between management contracting and construction management. But anyway, management contracting, you've got the developer again. Again, you've got the appointments of the architect, engineers, and other consultants. You've got a finance agreement, and then you've got the management contract with the management contractor. He then subcontracts the work in terms of packages, and you get the works contractors. Next, please, Suzanne. Right. A fast-track strategy which overlaps the design and construction stages and allows early elements of the construction process to be commenced before design has been completed. Because let's take the packages, you know what you're going to end up building, but you want to get on with the groundworks because there's some difficulty or piling or whatever. You can get the foundations done while you're as long as you know what the foundations are going to look like, what it's going to be like, then you can carry on getting that work done as a work package before the other design is completed. So you can overlap things much more readily with this. The employer engages the management contractor to manage the overall contract in return for a fee. The management contractor does not carry out the construction works itself. In other words, all they're doing is paying for their expertise in managing the construction works. The management contractor will then enter into contracts for the individual work packages with individual works contractors. Then effectively, as they are subcontractors. They will be subcontractors, but each one's a separate contract. The employer will appoint a separate team of professionals, and the management contractor is therefore appointed early in the design and can advise on buildability and programme, because that's what they know about. A cost plan is utilised to control the development cost, although actual costs cannot be obtained until the final work package has been awarded. That's one of the disadvantages, because as things go on, you've got to know about, you want to know about the costs, and the costs, you'll only know about the cost when the final package is actually let. So at the moment, when you've got sort of big inflation in construction works, you might want to let certain packages early on, like steelwork. And what's happened is the employer's QS would have done a, so let's find these, the employer's QS would have done a cost plan as to give some overall guidance as what the anticipated cost should be. So what are the advantages? Well, in terms of time, the project period can often be relatively quick as the design and the construction can progress at the same time. In terms of the cost, the project can often be tailored to the client's needs as the construction period is reduced and the contractual arrangements have greater flexibility. And in terms of quality, then there's flexibility for the management contractor and design team to work together to achieve the client's requirements on quality. Disadvantages. In terms of time, the construction period is not certain from the outset because you don't know what packages you're going to let, what those packages include, because you start early, but then because you're letting the packages, each package will have its own time scale. And you've got to work out which packages you've got to do when. You can't let the roofing package, let's say, before the foundation package. Well, it can't be carried out before anyway. I suppose if you're certain of the design, you could do, I suppose, but it's unlikely. It's got to be sequential. Where delay occurs, the client will potentially have to make claims against the management contractor and the many works contractors. That's one of the disadvantages. The construction price is not certain from the outset, as I've described, because you use a cost plan to give you an overall budget, but then as the individual work packages get let, you can see how they compare with the original cost plan. It can be hard for the client to evaluate the full cost of tenders, as price will usually also include a percentage fee on top of the construction costs. Because what you've got is construction cost, and then because you're paying the management contractor a fee, his fee has to be added to it. Depends on how you actually arrange the pricing and the payment to the management contractor. In view of the number of parties engaged, the overall responsibility for the quality may be split between the professional consultants, the management contractor, and the works contractors, meaning a greater number of claims having to be brought. Because if you've got a claim, then I'll tell you, solicitors will tell you to sue everybody, let the court sort out who's actually responsible, because everyone will blame everybody else. Now we go into construction management. Here you've got a developer, a funder with the finance agreement. Again, the developer, the employer has the construction manager, an architect, an engineer, other consultants, so all those appointments. Then on the other side, they've got the trade contracts. So in other words, you've not got a main contractor, you go straight into the trade contracts. Thanks, Suzanne. So it's another fast-track strategy where individual elements of the project are let before the design of later works packages or elements have been completed. Can anyone think of an example where you want to use construction management or management contracting because of the speed? Anyone, just unmute yourself and see if you've got an idea. The most common one I know is following a fire or flood damage. Flood damage is a bit slower because you've got to let the waters go down, the flood dissipate, and then you've got to let the building dry. You often have to do some work and then let the building dry out. But certainly after a fire, then the important point is to get the building rebuilt, usually anyway, because if the company is either losing money very, very rapidly because they don't have premises to either work in, or if it's manufacturing, to manufacture anything, and if the company actually has business continuation insurance, and both of these I've been involved in over the years, if you've got business continuation insurance, the insurance company is hemorrhaging money at a phenomenal rate. So they want, for them, the costs have to be within reason, the quality's got to be okay, but the important thing is time. Get on with it, because the shorter the time, the quicker the business continuation insurer will have to, the less time he'll have to make payments, because he wants the business reinstated as quickly as possible. So anyway, construction management, another fast track strategy where individual elements of the project are let before the design later works of later works, packages or elements have been completed. The employer engages a construction manager to manage the overall contract in return for a management fee. I saw in the diagram before you had the management contractor. Sorry, the project, the construction manager was one of the professionals. In addition to the contract with the construction manager, the contractors for the individual trade packages are placed directly with the employer, and the trade contractors, which are effectively subcontractors, but they're direct contracts, and the employer will need to have a high level of involvement during the design, development and the construction phases of work. The employer will appoint a separate team of professionals, and again, the project can benefit from the early involvement of the construction manager and key trade contracts. As with management contracting, the final cost will only be known when the final trade package element has been awarded. I'd say, in fact, as a QS, I'd say even later than that, because it's when the final account is agreed for each of the trade contracts. Thank you, Suzanne. So, what are the advantages of construction management? Project period can often be relatively quick as the design and the construction can progress at the same time. A buildable solution can be reached quickly as the construction manager will have the appropriate experience. In terms of cost, the construction manager will potentially charge a fixed or partially fixed professional fee. It may be a percentage or whatever, but partly fixed, but there may be limits on that. It just depends how you set the fee up. Rather than a percentage on the whole construction price as used in management contracting. Management contracting, it's a percentage of whatever they do. Here, it's not. It's a fixed fee, or it could be a fixed fee subject to variation if the overall value of the project goes up. Or down, I suppose it can be. There is flex, unlikely to go down actually. If the project goes up, that's our minimum fee, but if it gets much more complicated and much more expensive, we want additional money. They don't normally hand back some of the fee. There's flexibility for the construction manager and the design team to work together to achieve the client's requirements. And in view of the flexibility of construction management, the client's quality requirements can generally be delivered. So what are the disadvantages? The construction period isn't certain because you've got all these packages and then people get the trade contracts, and the trades will you have to agree then what their programs are, and that may not fit in with your overall programs. And of course, any delay in developing the design or whatever, then that, and delay in tendering the work packages, then that can delay things as well. Where delay occurs, the client will potentially have to make claims against the many trade contractors. Well, it may be, or you just may have to just suck it up. It depends. If there's delay by one of the trade contractors, then that delays subsequent trade contractors, in which case you might go off, you get claims in from the following trade contractors, which you'll then have to pursue the original trade contractor who's made has caused the delay. So it can get quite complicated. The construction price is not certain from the outset, which I've described. Notwithstanding the engagement of the construction manager, input from the client in terms of time, resource and experience will be required to manage the trade contractors. Because you're contracting direct with the trade contractors, it means that you're going to have to spend time and therefore money on it. In view of the number of parties engaged, the overall responsibility for quality may be split between the professional consultants, the construction manager and the trade contractors, meaning a greater number of claims having to be brought. Thanks, Suzanne. Finally, cost plus contracts. It's an interesting one. A procurement route that enables the contractor to recover an agreed profit in addition to its costs. The profit element is normally identified as being a percentage of the cost price. The client will have very little control over costs, and it's therefore suggested as low risk procurement option for the contractor. Because what risk is the contractor taking? He's got to organise things, yes, but whatever his costs are, he just adds them on. And interestingly, a major contractor also had part of the group, a development company. And I was instructed, because there was an argument at main board between the construction director and the development director, because the development director thought the construction director was taking the mickey and overcharging the development company. This is in the same main board. This is two directors having a spat. So I was actually instructed by the chairman to audit the main contractor's costs and were they right, and their processes, to make sure that they were actually getting the best price and not overcharging the development company. which all seemed a bit daft to me personally, because it was still going into the group profits. It just meant that if the contracting arm was overcharging, then the development company was making a bit less. And if he hadn't overcharged, then the development company would make a bit more. The overall profit for the group would be the same. But anyway, seemed to me they were down my fees, or my firm's fees. But it was an interesting job to do. It was interesting the first meeting to see how very welcome I was, or how welcomed I was by the contracting QS, the contractor's QS. In fact, they weren't overcharging. I went through and I got on with him fine, to be honest. I saw their system and said, well, what you're doing is absolutely fine. Anyway, cost plus contracts are rarely used to appoint a contractor on commercial development projects in England and Wales, but they can be appropriate when engaging a contractor to carry out one-off works, such as an urgent repair. Again, sometimes with cost plus contracts following fire, it's a quick way of doing things. Just tell the contractor to get on with it. If you've got a big warehouse or whatever, let's say an industrial unit, you've got to get plant out, you get a contractor on board, and then just say it's cost plus, but you organise getting that out, getting the site cleared. We'll get surveys done, structural engineer, can we reuse the foundations or can't we? Have they got to come up? Is the steel frame okay following the fire, or is it going to be too weak? All those sort of things. And therefore you get a contractor on board straight away. And a contractor's not going to do things with fixed costs. What he's going to say is, I want a fee, and it's just a cost plus contract. In addition, cost plus contracts may be appropriate for complex projects like IChemE, the IChemE Green Book, Institute of Chemical Engineers, or scenarios where an experienced client has previously worked with a contractor and believes it can collaborate with them, for example, to procure a new process plant. And I think the next slide just says questions. And I make it, according to this, it's 8:59, so you've got a minute left for questions. But I hope you found that informative.
Hi there. Can I just ask if your slides can be shared afterwards?
Yes, as usual. Yeah, we always say that with the QSI. Yes, I'll send a PDF to Suzanne and she can send them out to anyone who wants them, or just everyone who's attended. I don't mind.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Now I've picked up some of the typos. It might not be immediate because I like to correct some of the typos before I send them to Suzanne, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
Hi Keith, Jim Button here. The one thing that I find fascinating over the years as I've become an older man is the complete lack of trust or requirement for bills of quantities. And I went to Trent Poly in 1987 and learned how to do bills of quants in SMM7, and have been a strong believer that actually is the best way to get cost certainty for a client, ensuring the design team complete their designs before they're sent to a contractor. We end up being a checking process. We make sure everything's there. You then, any variation, all those items are there to use as the basis for valuing variations. And I just don't know how, as quantity surveyors, we've allowed ourselves to let that go, to give the contractor complete control of everything on design and build. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you in terms of I have always said and still say the first time a building gets built is when the quantity surveyor measures a bill of quantities. And I'll give you one very quick example. I was doing a job, and when building regulations changed and they could use computers, I had a job where they used a computer to design the concrete frame, and they had the beams going between the columns were narrow and deep. Now, structurally, that was absolutely fine. But when you looked at it, the floor to ceiling height, and you went to measure the concrete, you realised the concrete beams actually stood down below the level of the suspended ceiling. I highlighted it, the engineer redid the design and ended up with what you'd expect, near square, but rectangular columns, which were much wider and therefore much shorter. and that went above the suspended ceiling. But yes, I mean, I think, to be honest, it's with design and build, people want to transfer risk. And contractors have accepted it over the years. Contractors have accepted more and more liability. Again, but when I had a QS practice, I was advising a contractor. I said, you can't possibly accept this design and build terms, because basically on the wording you've got, not only are you responsible for the architect's design on this job, it could be there's what the lawyers could interpret it that you're actually responsible for every design the architect's done since birth. So, and he just turned around and said,
no, they did. I did one. I did one. I don't know, 15 years ago. The employer's solicitor completely changed the contract, taking the knots out and put them where they weren't. And the contractor sat in front of me and signed it. And I think from our point of view, it's just that you talk about risk transference. What I don't think my clients understand is if they go design and build on a contract, the contractor will take the risk, and the employer will pay for it. If you spend the time and effort to make sure those risks are designed out, or addressed, like you said with your columns, it's always an eaves detail that never works, isn't it, and doesn't match with the structural engineers. You don't have to do that. But I think we've lost it. How many of us are calling ourselves cost consultants rather than quantity surveyors? I think maybe I'm just getting old and thinking, what have we done? How have we lost control of that situation?
Yes, I think we have. And the architects lost control of contract administration. And there's so many QSs ended up being contract administrators. And now we've got this new thing of project management. Project management is a lovely title. It means all things to all men. Everyone has a clear view of what project management is. If you ask two different people, they'll tell you something completely different. But yeah, in terms of, I think really, it was risk transfer, particularly of the ground. That's why they went to design and build. And if you ask an architect, I know talking to my own colleagues, so we're an unusual team here because years ago we had the idea of having a combined team of construction professionals, mainly QSs, and solicitors in one place. Therefore, we had the construction knowledge and the legal knowledge in one place. You could advise clients better, and it works. It works because we calm down the solicitors. But what they want to do is that their job, their function is to do the best for their client. Right? Is it doing the best for your client if you transfer all the risk and the client pays more? The answer to that is sometimes it's certainty of price. And that's why you go back to time, cost and quality. What's the emphasis on cost? Is it the limiting factor? Which it can be for some clients. But yes, what they want to do is you've got one point of contact. If there's anything wrong with the building, you just go after the contractor, the design and build contractor. And of course, solicitors will always look at the worst case scenario. It's what you pay, they get paid to do. If I'm
dominating the questions and answers, forgive me, but I think that thing about the solicitors, I worked it out recently, is if they can make sure they don't get sued by the employer by putting all these things in place, they're covered, i.e. making the employer pay more to get the contractor to take the risk, so long as it doesn't backfire on them, which I don't think sometimes is in the best interest of the employer.
But defending solicitors, they are there to advise the client. The client actually instructs the solicitor. So, as long as you are in, and I'm in meetings, I say that will cost you more money, but there's less risk. And if it goes wrong, the costs are less because you'll only have to go after the design and build contractor. And in those circumstances, it's up to the client which they want.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. Sorry, I'm taking too much of everyone's time. I'm sure
no, it's okay. It's been an interesting conversation. And I learnt on SM5.
There's me. Well, yeah, I started on 6, but halfway through my course, we went to 7, which confused me.
When I did finals, I had the choice. I could either do the measurement exam in SM5 or SM6. So.
Thanks, Kate.
There was an interesting comment in the chat from David, which it says, thanks, Keith, very interesting and helpful. In addition to time and quality, health and safety is paramount in the infrastructure projects that I am involved in. Mental health is now a headline consideration.
Yes.
Bringing things up to date, really.
Yes, it is. I mean, the ultimate triangle, though, is the eternal triangle is time, cost, and quality. That's what we've always learned. But yes, I mean that's about the outcome. What he's talking about is the construction process. But yes, I agree. And in fact, I was saying last week I was teaching some nuclear graduates just on commercial awareness. So not full project management, just to make them, they were young graduates, but to be commercially aware. And one of the things, I gave a list of all the things they should consider. And I said, well, which one would you put, how would you put them in and prioritise them? And because they all work in the nuclear industry, straight away they said health and safety #1. And I said, well, as a member of the public, not working in your industry, I'm delighted that you put health and safety as #1.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I think a number of people want the slides, which is fine. I'll get them amended.
Yeah, that's fine. And I've made a note of the people that have put that in the chat room. If you do want the slides and you've not put a note in the chat room, then just email me after we've gone away. Also, anyone that wants a CPD certificate, again, just let me know and I'll sort that out for you. We haven't actually got next month's CPD in place yet for the First Thursday Club, but there will be one. And as soon as we do that, we've had something in place that's fallen through, so we're having to rethink. But we will get something in place. We will let you know what's going to be happening on the first Thursday in March, whatever date that is. So I hope to see many of you then. Or if not, in forthcoming months. We'll keep you all posted. And as I say, you've all got my email address if you need anything in the meantime. So a huge thank you to Keith for what looks like it's been a very interesting CPD from all your comments there in the chat room. And thank you all for attending. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you both.
Cheers, thanks.